Fellas, are grapplers taking over the UFC? There's been a big debate in the MMA community recently whether striking or grappling is the best base for the UFC or just the best base for MMA. Some people think grappling is taking over. It's a new breed of styles when it comes to mixed martial arts. Some people still back striking, saying that striking's superior. So I'm going to be trying to answer the question of whether grapplers are actually taking over the UFC, whether it's a lie, a myth, or if it's actually true. And I'm going to be trying to base it off, actual statistics, not just my own opinion. And we'll go in there with the first kind of source, which I think is a good way of seeing if they're actually taking over the UFC. And that's to look at the last 10 UFC title fights between a striker versus a grappler. This is basically the best striker versus the best grappler in every weight class, considering it's going to be for a title fight. And we can kind of see a trend whether the strikers are winning, whether the grapplers are winning, and who seems to be more successful. So we'll go with the most recent one: Pantoja versus Kai Asakura, the grappler winning Pantoja. O'Malley versus Merab, the grappler winning Merab. Edwards versus Muhammad 2, the grappler winning Bilal Muhammad. Makachev versus Poirier, the grappler winning Islam Makachev. Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington, the striker winning Leon. O'Malley versus Sterling, the striker winning O'Malley. Leon versus Usman 3, the striker winning Leon Edwards. Jones versus Garm, the grappler winning John Jones. Makachev versus Volkanovski, the grappler winning Volkanovski. And then Teixeira versus Hill, the striker won in Jamal Hill. And I haven't counted Jones versus Stipe Miocic or Makachev versus Volk 2, just because even though the grapplers won, they mainly used striking to either get the win or the majority of the fight was grappling in that fight. So we can see already that even though it's not massive, grapplers have seemed to be having a lot more success against strikers in these big title fights, especially in the year of 2024, where we've seen a bunch of new grappling champions be crowned. If we do the same thing and look at the last 5 UFC Fight Night main events, where we've seen a striker versus a grappler, the most recent one, Moreno versus Albazi, the striker winning Brandon Moreno. Pereira versus Hernandez, the grappler winning Anthony Hernandez. Royval versus Tyra, the striker winning Brandon Royval. Sandhagen versus Nurmagomedov, the grappler won Inuman Nurmagomedov. And then Namajunas versus Cortez, the striker won when Namajunas beat Tracy Cortez. So even there, strikers are winning, so it's super close. So I think after this, we can say that grapplers have slightly more success in these big fights. We can't just easily say that grapplers completely blow out strikers when it comes to a striker versus a grappler in a big fight, because if we do look at the past couple of title fights and fight night main events, even though grapplers do seem to be doing the better, especially in the title fights, it's not like they're completely blowing out strikers out the window. I mean, maybe this year we've seen a lot more grapplers become a champion, so maybe nowadays it's changed a bit. But if we look at the past couple of title fights, that's not been the case. But what about the frequency? If grapplers are taking over the UFC, surely the UFC rankings and the fighters at the top level should be filled with grapplers. There should be way more grapplers taking over the rankings than strikers, getting into the rankings instead of strikers. So are there more grapplers or strikers at the highest level? So what I'm going to do is just like I did then, where I gave the point to the striker or the grappler. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go through every single ranked fighter in the UFC, and each fighter is going to give a point to either a striker or a grappler based on what their style is. And if they're a champion, they'll give 3 points. So, for example, in the welterweight division, Bilal Muhammad will give 3 points to grappling because he's a champion and he represents grappling. Ian Gary will give 1 point to striking, and then Buckley won't give any points because he's more of a balanced style. So any balanced fighter who kind of has a very well-rounded style just won't give any points at all. So, for example, if we start off with the heavyweight division, John Jones, I would say, has a predominantly, at least in the heavyweight division recently, a grappling heavy style. We saw it when he fought Cyril Gane and essentially went to the ground immediately and got the submission. The first round against Stipe Miocic took him down and tripped him up. Even though he finished that fight on the feet, a lot of that was due to the grappling. And then even in his late light heavyweight career, a lot of the reason he was getting these wins is because he was mixing up against the grappling, holding people against the cage, and especially in the Gustafsson fight where he absolutely bullied him with ground and pound. So already 3 to grapplers because of John Jones. And the other heavy grapplers in the heavyweight division, I'd say, are Curtis Blades, Jelton Almeida, Sergey Spivak, and Shamil Gaziev, which would bump grappling up to 7. Now, if we're talking about the well-rounded fighters who we need to kind of exclude, I'd say Tom Aspinall, Marcin Tibera, and Waldo Cortez Acosta are kind of the more balanced fighters. They don't really use predominantly striking or grappling. I know Aspinall's been using a lot more striking recently, but I'd say these guys are more balanced. So the rest of the division would fall under the category of a striker. So in the heavyweight division, strikers are above. And this kind of makes sense because when you think of the heavyweight division, you think of brawlers, you think of knockouts, you think of these bit, heavy-handed guys going out there and swinging at each other. That's kind of like the stereotype for heavyweight. So it kind of makes sense why strikers are in the lead when it comes to purely the heavyweight division. If we do the same thing in the light heavyweight division, Alex Pereira this time, obviously, he's known for his kickboxing. Comes from Glory Kickboxing, and he's arguably the best or one of the best kickboxers or just strikers in general in the UFC right now. So he's going to give an extra 3 points to strikers and bump it up to 11. The other strikers in the light heavyweight division, you've got Yuri Prohaska, Jamal Hill, Khalil Roundtree, Jan Blachowicz, Alexander Rakic, Carlos Ulberg, Volkan Oezdemir, Johnny Walker, Bogdan Guskov, Dominic Reyes, and Azamat Mirzakhanov, which brings striking to a whopping 22. The only well-rounded guys or balanced guys I'd say in the division are Magomed Ankalaev and Anthony Smith. which leaves the only two guys representing grappling being Nikita Krylov and Alonzo Menifield. So essentially, light heavyweight is a striking fan's dream. If you're a fan of striking, the light heavyweight division is the division for you. Nearly every single top fight in the light heavyweight division is always a striking matchup. I can't remember the last time we saw two guys go out and grapple in this division. So again, leaving light heavyweight, strikers are in a massive lead against grapplers. If we do the same for the middleweight division, look at Dricus du Plessis. Dricus, I mean, he's knocked out Robert Whittaker, submitted Israel Adesanya, did a bit of both against Sean Strickland, and he's got an equal number of knockouts and submissions on his record. I'd say Dricus du Plessis, we can't really give him a striking any points or grappling because he's very well-rounded. He's more of a well-rounded guy. He likes mixing the two of them between each other. So I think for Dricus du Plessis, he's a balanced fighter. He doesn't really add to any. But if we do look at the grapplers of the middleweight division, you've got Chimaev, Anthony Hernandez, Jack Hermansson, and Brendan Allen. I'd say those are the main grappling heavy fighters in the middleweight division, which would add a couple of points to grapplers, bumping it up to 13. I'd say the only guy who's really balanced and doesn't really use either just pure striking or pure grappling is probably Roman Dolidze. I mean, Jack Hermansson uses striking as well, but I'd say Dolidze is only the consistently most balanced guy. Meaning the rest of the division is, again, a very heavy striking division, bumping it up to 32, which again makes sense. A lot of the top middleweight fights have always been stand-up fights, especially in the Izzy era. There wasn't much grappling going on, and even now with the likes of Caio Brallo and Sean Strickland and, you know, a lot of these middleweight contenders, it is still a very striking heavy division. So striking is still heavily in the lead. If it goes to the welterweight division, you've got Bilal Muhammad is the champion, who is obviously known for being a very heavy wrestler. That's his style, that's his bread and butter, that's what won him the belt. So he gives an extra 3 points to grapplers, but still they're significantly behind when it comes to actual points on the compared to strikers. Now, if we look at the strikers in the welterweight division, you've got Leon Edwards, Ian Garrick, JDM, Stephen Thompson, Michael Morales, Carlos Prates, Jeff Neal, and MVP, which, I mean, just puts strike in the lead again, 40-16. I'd say the only two guys that are fully balanced is Joaquin Buckley and Vicente Luque, meaning the only strikers, the grapplers in this division, well, there's only 5 of them. You've got Shavkat Usman, Brady Burns, and Colby Covington, obviously including Bilal Muhammad as well, which would move the grapplers to 21 points, which is, again, still significantly behind when it comes to the welterweight division on grapplers, 21-40. If we do the lightweight division, you've got Islam Makhachev. I know there's people that want to make an argument to say that Makhachev's a striker because he has been using his stand-up a lot in his recent fights, but I'd say Makhachev's still a wrestler first, striker second. He comes from a wrestling background. He uses wrestling to win fights. That's his bread and butter. That's how he wins his fights. He definitely can strike. He's definitely a solid striker, but I think it would be shameful to not put Islam Makhachev in the category of a wrestler, especially when you look at his UFC record, UFC career as a whole. So Makhachev's going to give 3 points to the grapplers, bumping it up to 24. The other heavy grapplers in the lightweight division, I'd say, are Arman Sarukian, Charles Oliveira. I know, again, you can make an argument to say that Oliveira's more well-rounded, but if you look at most of his finishes or most of his wins in the lightweight division, it's all been due to grappling. You've got Mateus Gamrot, Renato Marcano, and Paddy Pimblett. So grapplers are 29. They're catching up. They're not too far behind, but then when you factor in that the well-rounded guys in this division are Benil Dariush, Benoit Saint-Denis, and Yoel Alvarez, and the rest of the division is strikers, again, that bumps it up to 47, which I'm going to be honest, I didn't really expect grapplers to be a majority in the lightweight division. There's actually more grapplers than any other division and more than strikers in this division. When you think of grapplers, you kind of had this thing in your head, this kind of narrative in your head that they might be boring, but I think what makes the lightweight division so good is even though there's more grapplers, the grapplers are all fun. All of these grapplers are in fun fights. They all have decent stand-up. I mean, Gamrot was called a boring grappler, and he just had a fight of the year contender against Dan Hooker. And you've got guys like Paddy Pimblett who are going out there and brutalizing people with his jiu-jitsu. So I think something the lightweight division does really well is that they've got fun grapplers, but still, strikers are still massively ahead with 47-29. If we go to the featherweight division, you've got Ilia Topuria, who I would say is a grappler turned striker. If you look at his early MMA career, predominantly a jiu-jitsu guy, a bunch of submissions in his early MMA career, but recently his stand-up's been on another level, knocking out Volkanovski and Max Holloway. His boxing is probably the best in the UFC right now. So he adds 3 to strikers, bumping it up to 50 and 29. The other strikers in the featherweight division are Volkanovski, Max Holloway, because technically he's still ranked, Yair Rodriguez, Arnold Allen, Josh Emmett, Calvin Kattar, Giga Chikadze, Dan Ige, and Edson Barboza. So striking is still massively ahead by 30 points, 59 to 29 in favor of striking. Now, I'd say the well-rounded guys, Diego Lopez and Leroy Murphy, are the only 2 fully balanced guys, and then the rest, I guess, are grapplers. Featherweight's never been a division that's got a lot of grapplers. I mean, you've got guys like Movsar Evloev and Sterling who have recently made it into the rankings, but featherweight's always been kind of like a striking heavy division, and again, it's a striking fan's dream as the featherweight division. If you take away a couple of fighters, most of the fights at the highest level, especially in the title picture, do tend to be stand-up fights, with the likes of Topuria, Volk, Yair Rodriguez, even guys like Arnold Allen on the come-up as well, and Josh Emmett. Striking heavily in the lead, 59 to 33 in favor of striking. If we go to the bantamweight division, again, another grappling champion with Merab, known for his high-pressure, high-paced wrestling. Probably with the best wrestler, or definitely not the best, but one of the best wrestlers in the UFC right now, very dominating. So he's going to give an extra 3 to grappling, moving it up to 36, but again, it's not going to do much. The other grapplers in this division, I'm surprised that there's actually not as much grapplers as I thought. You've got Umar Nurmagomedov, Henry Cejudo, and Mario Batista, and that's pretty much it when it comes to grapplers, obviously including Merab as well, in the bantamweight division. So it moves it up to 39. I'd say Davison Figueiredo, even though a lot of people can make an argument to say that he's more of a grappler, if you look at his bantamweight career, he's predominantly been using striking a lot more than grappling in his bantamweight career so far. So I'm going to count Figueiredo as well-rounded, and then the rest of the division, again, an extremely heavy striking division with the likes of O'Malley, Yan, Sandhagen, and Vera. But again, this kind of surprised me as well, because every single time I think of the top of the division of the bantamweight, I'm always thinking of grappling matchups with the likes of Merab, Cejudo, Aljamain Sterling a few years ago, now Umar Nurmagomedov. When you think of bantamweight, you think of grappling a lot of the time, but again, striking still massively ahead, 70 to 39 in favor of strikers when it comes to frequency. And then finally for the flyweight division, you've got Pantoja as the champion. Again, a very jiu-jitsu heavy guys, Pantoja, scrappy jiu-jitsu style that he's used to win nearly every single one of his fights, which again, you can give him an extra 3 points for grappling, doesn't really do much because they're still so behind. The strikers in the flyweight division, you've got Roy Val Moreno, Kai Kara France, Manel Cap, Joshua Van, Charles Johnson, Bruno Silva, and Kaya Sakura. Which brings strikers up to 78, and they're still massively ahead. Steve Erceg, I know a lot of people can say that he's a striker, but I'd say he's more well-rounded as well. Previous to his, he comes from a grappling background. He was shooting takedowns against Pantoja and Alex Perez. He's got a very jiu-jitsu heavy style as well as good boxing too. So the rest of the division, I'd say grapplers, but again, there's not much. There's only 5 grapplers outside of Pantoja in the flyweight division. So we've got 78 to 47. So we can already see that strikers are massively ahead. But does this mean that strikers are necessarily better than grapplers just because they have more frequency? I'd have to disagree. I mean, if we look at the pound for pound list, which, you might argue is the most accurate representation because it's the 15 best fighters in the world, and we look at how many grapplers and strikers are in there. If we take out to Aspinall and Dricus du Plessis, the well-rounded guys, even them, there's still more strikers than grapplers. It is fairly close. There's only one separating them both, but 7 strikers, 6 grapplers. There's still more strikers as of right now in the pound for pound list than grapplers. But again, frequency doesn't equal better. I mean, if we even look at every UFC champion right now who has a contender fight, or at least a fight that we think is going to be next, if you look at every champion and who they're going to be taking on next, the majority of the contenders that they're taking on are going to be grapplers, excluding Tom Aspinall, who's balanced, and Sean Strickland, who's a striker for Dricus du Plessis. Most of these guys are grapplers. I mean, Tatiana Suarez, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Umar Nurmagomedov, Arman Sarukian, all grapplers. And even in the case of Sean Strickland, yes, he's going to be fighting for the belt next and he's a striker, but a lot of people would argue that Hamzat Chimaev, who's a heavy grappler, should be taking on Dricus du Plessis instead, which again only proves that grappling seems to be the more common approach. And there's obviously a grappling style which I haven't mentioned yet, which I'm going to mention, because this is kind of like the most popular. When people say that grappling's taking over the UFC, what they're really referring to is the Dagestani grappling, or to put it more of a broad approach, this area of the world between Kazakhstan, Chechnya, and Dagestan. These guys are the grapplers a lot of people like to talk about. And if we look at the ranked grapplers from this area of the world, there's actually quite a few. You've got Makhachev, Umar Nurmagomedov, Shavkat, Hamzat Chimaev, Movsar Evloev, Tagir Ulanbekov, Azu Almabayev, and Shamil Gaziev. All these guys are ranked grapplers from this area, and combined they have a record of 10-1 against ranked strikers. So every single time those guys have faced a ranked striker, they've managed to get a record of 10-1. The only one guy that lost is none other than Shamil Gaziev when he got battered by Rosenstrike. That's the only loss on there. And that's not even counting the likes of Khabib Nurmagomedov and Askar Askarov, who would have brought the record up to 18-2 had I counted them as well. So I think it's safe to say that these Dagestani, not even just Dagestani, but, Chechnya, Kazakhstan fighters basically from the area of the world seem to be having the best success with the grappling, considering that, like I said, they've got a record of 10-1 against ranked grapplers if you look at all of them so far. So I'd say this is the most dominant type of grappler. When people say grappling is taking over the UFC, what they really mean is this area of the world is taking over the UFC with the grappling, because that's what they've shown from statistics. So my final conclusion is that grapplers, they're not dominating the UFC. I mean, we've already been over that. If we look at the highest level in the rankings, there are significantly more strikers than grapplers in the rankings. I mean, the only weight class that has more grapplers than strikers, I'm pretty sure, is the lightweight division. But even then, if you take away the 3 from Makhachev, I'm pretty sure strikers are still ahead. So they're not dominating the UFC. There's still plenty of strikers. But I will say, grapplers do seem to be having more success than strikers in the big fights. That can also be backed up by the fact that the likes of Merab and Bilal Muhammad, 2 heavy wrestlers, have managed to become a champion this year, beating other strikers in Sean O'Malley and Leon Edwards, who were previously called the best strikers of, obviously, their generation. And even the likes of Makhachev, Pantoja, and Jones, who have a predominantly striking style, still being champions in the UFC. But that is, in my opinion, my thoughts on grappling, or just the grappling versus striking narrative in the UFC. I'd say strikers, still plenty of them. Grapplers aren't taking over the UFC, but it seems to be a theme. But then in the big fights, grapplers do seem to be better than striking. But again, still fairly 50-50. Not one of them are completely dominating. But let me know your thoughts on this if you agree/disagree. And thank you for watching.